Hello, and welcome back to the live screen on Tuesday. Tuesday's Tips is what I'm calling it. I started the live stream last week on Tuesday to test the software and to announce some really good discounts that came out. And I ended up with such good feedback from everyone that I decided it was kind of important for me to find a way to continue. So today I am going to do what I call Tuesday's Tips. And this, I hope, will be fairly consistent that I can do this. But I want to take this time to focus on a specific question that comes in from one of my subscribers or viewers and that I get all the time. And that way I can look at that specific question in great detail. Today, I'm going to discuss in fairly good detail. I have a wide variety of questions that came in from viewers and subscribers. And if anyone online has a question, you're welcome to also ask that. But today I'm going to cover batteries, open loop and closed loop, what they mean, what some of the advantages are, and what some of the disadvantages are to doing one or the other. There is no, I'm not going to say there's no clear winner. It depends really on what you want to do. I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of videos I have up and coming or ones that I just released. This morning came out a DIY battery build. This week is all about batteries for me. So this morning we did a DIY battery build. That video released and is doing very well. I encourage you, if you have any interest in building your own battery, to take a look at that video. Coming up here in the next few days, I'm going to start to incorporate a new battery for the solar trailer. And we're going to put in a brand new lead time 24 volt 100 amp battery. I'll do some capacity tests on it using some of the panels off of the solar shed. We'll run it through the ringer, make sure it's going to be able to really hold up to the to what's needed for the solar shed, and then we'll get that started. And then after that, we'll do an installation video also for that lead time battery. But then we'll have a fourth video, and probably between the two lead time batteries will probably be the battery for the EG4 48 volt rack mount batteries that are installed here on the RV. Those were my first three batteries, and we'll go through those. So you'll have a good variety of batteries and stuff. And so I thought it was appropriate to take care of open loop, closed loop, what they mean, and answer a few questions about that and kind of do the best I could to make it a little bit more clear to everyone. So I'm going to jump right into some of the questions. And if you're online, feel free to jump in and ask any question you want. Um, Mike started this off. Mike from Arizona asked, what exactly is the difference between open loop and closed loop batteries? So the battery itself isn't much different. What is different is that on a closed loop battery, so an open loop battery is your traditional battery that you just connect to something, you charge it independently, you discharge it independently. It really has no wires or anything connected to it to give you a status to communicate with the BMS if there is a BMS or anything of that nature. So that is a open loop battery. And what it means by that is there's open connection, like a normal connection. We talk about connections being opened or closed meaning that they're closed and power is allowed to flow. So we're talking about communications being open or closed. And that's the kind of the way you can look at that. So an open loop battery means there is no communication set up to communicate with that battery. And a majority of the time, those type of batteries, you use voltage or how many amps that battery can take in to handle it. Now, a closed loop communication battery, like the EG4 batteries that I'll go over later this week with that video. The closed loop batteries actually have communication cables and they link together, and then those connect to the inverter to relay information about the battery. Now, it depends on which battery it is, and it depends on the inverter, and it depends on what the desired design around that. Unfortunately, the industry on battery design and coming up with how to connect these for open loop hasn't standardized in any real fashion yet. We have a few protocols out, RS485, or you'll hear, Pylon, or, several other types of batteries, but none of them have, we're still in that VHS beta type argument of which one's best and what do we need, and so on and so forth. So there isn't any real standards put out yet for closed loop communications. Now, there are some advantage to closed loop communications, and but that is the exact difference between them. There's advantages to both, and there's a place for both of them. Originally, when I connected the RV, I went with closed loop communication, and I connected my three EG4 batteries directly to the 6000 XP, and it told the 6000 XP when to slow down charging, which batteries were turning on, which ones were turning off, what the voltage cells were, and it kind of communicated all that information and told it how to control the batteries and work better and smoother with the batteries. Since then, back a few months ago, I added a DIY battery, which was the release from this morning. The video that I released this morning is basically how I built that DIY battery, and it doubled my capacity. So in that case, I took that battery and made it open loop and took the other three off and made it all run on open loop. Now, you can do a hybrid also, where I could have just left the three batteries connected and ran them closed loop with the inverter, and then left the third or the fourth battery just open loop. And there's no problem doing that either, except that the inverter is going to take its charging limits and stuff from the three batteries that are connected. Now, if you have enough batteries in that bank for it to exceed the charging capacity anyway, then that's really not too much of an issue. In closed loop, you're going to be using that battery voltage, and you're going to basically say, when you get up to, let's say, 56.2 volts in a 48 volt battery, then you'll want to stop and just let it stay there until the amperage drops down and it gets completely saturated, and then you're going to drop off to a 54 volt holding state and just kind of provide enough power to keep it from going down from there. So that is the actual difference between those two items there. So I'm going to move on to some other questions that come up from this same subject, and we'll take a few of these, and I think this is the right button. Sarah in Oregon wants to know, is closed loop communications required for safety or just convenience? It depends on the inverter. There's a lot of inverters that insist on closed loop communications, and there's a lot of opinions on the matter also. We did open loop communication for years and years and years and years. The argument is if the battery is telling the inverter how much amperage it can take because it knows exactly the cell voltages, it knows exactly what's going on, that if I have two batteries, let's say, for example, and one battery gets fully charged before the other, it can say, hey, inverter, only send half the power. I can't handle all of the charging power. This is true. At the same time, when your battery starts to get to a certain point, its absorption rate drops automatically. So as long as you're not cramming that voltage in there, it can be a bit of both. I would say that it is partially for safety. It's also partially for convenience to make sure that you don't have to monitor the batteries or keep up with it. The inverter takes care of that. And that's why it's, I think eventually at some point in the future, it will be the way to go. Today, without there being a whole lot of standards outlined and stuff like that, I think that it's going to be very hard for us to say that this is the only solution at this point. But right now, it's a little of both, depending upon the system that you have. The next question I have is from Tom in Florida, and he asked, can I run my battery bank without any closed loop communications? And the answer is absolutely yes. We ran like this for years. Your car battery runs with closed open loop. When you get in your car, your alternator comes on, it generates enough power, the battery absorbs what it can and doesn't use the rest. And so the alternator has a pull on it when it needs more, and it doesn't have that pull when it don't. Open loop communications for battery charging has been around for as long as batteries have been around. You put a battery in a charger and you plug it into a wall. That charger provides a certain amount of power that it can. And when the battery stops absorbing it, the charger says, hey, you're full. And that's how it knows that you're full. So open loop is not anything new. It's closed loop that is new. So you can always use open loop. And I don't feel that there's a safety reason with it. I think that there's probably good reasons to go closed loop in some cases, though. All right, let's move on to the next question. Is from Angela in New York, wonders, does closed loop improve battery life or just give more data? Well, that is the $6 million question. There is a lot of opinions in the world today on this exact subject. Some people think that it gives the batteries more life because you're going to charge them based on a profile that they feel is best. You're going to charge them at a rate that they feel is best. You're going to manage them the best that you possibly can based on their programmed manufacturer specs. That part of it is absolutely true. Um, I still think that we are at an age where a lot of the batteries that are coming out are between, let's say, 10,000 cycles at this point. And if you take a calculator and say 10,000 cycles and you run this battery every single day, and every single day you run it down to 0 and you run it back up to 100, you're looking at 365 days. You're looking at 27 years of usage on this battery. Now, at 27 years, they're going to say that that's to 80% depth of discharge. My question is it, do they actually have real valid tests that prove that at this point? I think that the manufacturers are being very cautious because they're giving these long-term warranties and they're really not sure how these batteries are going to live. In my opinion, I don't think it matters. I'm going to use my entire battery at this point, and if I lose an extra 10 or 15% at the end of that 27 years, I'll be okay with that, even if it takes a few years off of it. So so the question is does it give it more battery life or just more data? I think it does give it a little bit more data, and it might give it more battery life. We don't really know the answer to that. Or I don't know the answer that I haven't seen enough data to be convinced of any answers at this point. David in Texas asked, what hardware do I need to run closed loop battery setup? So at this point, you're going to need an inverter and you're going to need a battery that support the same communication protocols. For example, you're going to need an EG4 6000 XP and their life power batteries or their wall mount batteries. And those will basically work together. They communicate. There are an enormous number of brands out that have different types of communications and generic types of communications, but you basically need hardware from both sides, the battery and the inverter side, that communicate together and talk the same language. And therefore, once they do, then that communication would be set up and working together. And it doesn't matter at that point what it is. I have actually hooked my EG4 batteries to my solar assistant to provide me all the details of the battery cells and all of that. That works really well because it's compatible with that protocol. Hopefully, as the industry matures, the protocols will get better, and hopefully the industry will realize that if they all work together and come up with one single standard, it would benefit us all, or at least all of us as the consumers of the product would be benefited from it, and it may help them in some sort of fashion also. Next, I have Ben from Nevada who wants to know, is the EG4 6000 XP compatible with closed loop for all battery brands? The answer is no, it is not with all battery brands. There are a lot of batteries that don't support any closed loop communications. They're open loop strictly. The Lee Power that I'm going to be installing in the solar trailer is one of those batteries where it doesn't have any closed loop communications. And there are a lot of those batteries still out on the market, and there's nothing wrong with those batteries other than they don't support closed loop. So, but does the 6000 XP support a lot? Yes, there is a complete list in the manual of all the different batteries and all the different battery communication types that it supports. And you just need to look that up based on the batteries that you're purchasing and make sure that they support one of those. Next question is, um, Lena in Colorado asked, what is the most common issue when setting up closed loop communications? And I think a lot of this is going to depend on the brand and how you set the batteries up. I can tell you from a 6000 XP configuration with life power batteries and those types and other EG4 batteries, a lot of people get very confused about how the connecting and daisy chaining the batteries together, because what ends up happening is that you connect battery 1 to battery 2, battery 2 to battery 3, battery 3 to battery 4, and then battery 1 goes back and connects to the inverter. So there's inputs and outputs to that, and then you have to set these little pins to say this is battery 1, battery 2, battery 3, battery 4, and in certain circumstances, it's battery 0, battery 1, battery 2, or battery 1, battery 2, battery 3. And so there's some confusion there, but this comes with the lack of a common protocol and a lack of a standard for these to be to work on. So hopefully at some point in the future, with a real standard, you'll just be able to plug those batteries in like you do a USB port these days, and they'll all just say, okay, we're all part of the same family here, and one of them will take the leader role and assign all the batteries numbers and do all the communication, consolidate the information, send it back to the inverter or whatever it needs to do. I think that's where it'll eventually get to where there'll be no real configuration other than just connecting them together. But it's not there today. And it reminds me a lot of networks when they first came out. You had to terminate wires at certain places. You had to have certain connectors to things and all that. And nowadays, you just walk up and plug your computer in, and it instantly connects and works. And so the standards were designed, and now they work. So hopefully, it'll get that way with batteries also. Moving on to the next question, we have Chris from Georgia who's wondering, can I upgrade from open loop to closed loop later without replacing everything? And the answer to that is probably not, because we know from previous questions that the hardware is where it's going to determine if A, the inverter and the batteries are talking the same protocol. Second of all, if you've bought batteries that have no communications, then you have no chance of that working in the past. So it could go both ways. If you buy batteries that are compatible and you just go with open loop and then decide to change to closed loop later, yes. If you buy batteries that are not compatible and you want to switch later, then no. So my suggestion is that even if you're thinking you don't want to go closed loop, if you can find batteries that are compatible with each other in a closed loop situation, then I would suggest that you buy it that way. That way you've got that problem solved if you ever do change your mind. All right. Next question is Jamal in California ask, is CAN bus or RS485 better for closed loop battery communications? And to be honest with you, they're both inherited from older type things. CAN bus is commonly used in your car for all your devices and your electronic speedometers and your sensors and your car tires and all that stuff to communicate. It's very common. It's a bus where everything can communicate together. RS485 is more like an old daisy chain network with twisted pair cables that run from one battery to the other and connect to it. They both have their benefits. They both have their downsides. And to be honest with you, where that standard will come out is really, I'm not sure. I don't really have a preference one way or another. I've used them both. I've played with them both. I've seen the RS485. It seems to be okay. Um, and I've seen the CAN bus. I think the CAN bus is a bit more mature now because it's in drastically used in the automotive industry, and there's tools and stuff based around it. So maybe that will be where the standard comes from. But that's really a lot of assumptions and just lack of information on my side to make even such a statement. Nicole from Washington asks, will Solar Assistant or Home Assistant simulate closed loop functionality? And by simulate, do you mean, and I'm not sure if, I don't have anyone here to actually answer this, but by simulate, does that mean that it will pretend to send to the inverter the charging sticks? Technically, Solar Assistant can do some variation of that. I'm not aware of anything that Home Assistant can do that's officially supported. That doesn't mean that it can't be done. There's lots of devices and tools and toys and stuff out there that I've played with that are for RS-485 and CAN bus that do variations of that, but there is nothing that I've seen that's really at a plug and play or a very user-friendly method at this point. Although I would suspect as standards come along, that would definitely move in that direction, and it would be the right direction for it to go. Okay, moving on to Eli in Utah wants to know, can I mix closed loop and open loop batteries in the same system? Yes, actually you can. I ran my 6000 XP with closed loop on 3 of the batteries, and I ran it with the DIY battery open loop for quite a while. The charge profile says to charge the 3 batteries this way, and it puts the power out for all of that. And then the other battery consumes it, and it readjusts every time it happens. So I didn't have any problems with it, so I don't see any reason why you can't do that. The only reason that I would suspect that could cause problems if you have one small battery that you put in closed loop and you have 10 DIY batteries where the charge profile from that one battery is going to be so low that it's going to say I can only take 10 amps, when in reality you can take 1,000 amps from all the other batteries. So you may be charging relatively slow or relatively slow based on it. And then the other can happen also, where if you have 10 batteries and you only have the one extra, that shouldn't be a problem because the 10 batteries are going to ramp up and ramp down the correct way. But that kind of should take care of whether or not you can. So the answer is yes, you can, but you just still have to be alert to undersizing the closed loop side. Rachel from Illinois asks, what happens if my closed loop cables get disconnected during operation? That's actually a really good question, and I ran into a situation recently where I discovered the answer to this question. In the 6000 XP the other day, as I was playing around and working on the battery video, I wanted to switch the power from my closed loop configuration to an open loop configuration and switch them back into being plugged into my solar assistant. When I did so, I unplugged the communication port, I plugged it into the solar system, and as soon as the 6000 XP registered that the batteries were gone, it shut down. No longer did it run power because it didn't know what the state of the batteries were or how to do it. I thought that was a little bit strange that there was no backup profile for that to say, hey, you still got 53.6 volts or 53.2 volts or whatever the voltage happens to be. Go ahead and continue operating on an open loop. It did not. So this is going to really strictly depend on your inverter and how it allows you to configure it and if it stays connected or doesn't. I can say that short of me unplugging it or cutting a wire accidentally or something, I've not run into this problem. They're fairly reliable when they're out connected. Next question is, Ryan from Michigan asks, is a smart shunt like Victron's smart shunt considered closed loop? No. Closed loop means that everything that you're using is within full closed loop. If you connect the smart shunt to the inverter or to a Victron and you're not actually connected to the batteries, then no, not necessarily. If the batteries are connected to the Victron system and the Victron system is connected to the smart shunt and the smart shunt is then providing information to the inverter, then yes, that would be considered closed loop in my mind because you're providing battery feedback in a closed environment back to the inverter to say, hey, here's the status of my batteries and here's how the charge profile that I need you to charge it under. Victron does a pretty good job of that, of eliminating batteries out of the total charge capacity, where if I have 10 batteries that can take 10 amps a piece, it'll tell me I can charge it 100 amps. And when one battery gets full or gets an overvolt warning, it'll take that out of that capacity and drop it from 100 amps to I can now only take 90 amps, or I can now only take 80 amps. That doesn't mean the voltage isn't on the line, just as it would be with an open loop, but it does mean that the battery capacity or the maximum output would be limited by that closed loop communication with those batteries. Katie from North Carolina asked, does closed loop give better inverter control or just better monitoring? I think this is very similar to the question we asked before, and I think it's a little bit of both. It gives some people consider it better inverter control, and some people consider it better monitoring of that control from the inverter. I personally like the open loop connected to my solar assistant because it gives me better monitoring where I can monitor it better, but not necessarily the inverter. Sean in Tennessee wonders, can a charge controller participate in closed loop communications too? Can a charge controller participate in closed loop communications too? And I think the question here is on Victron devices, they specifically, and the inverters, because we're talking about mostly all-in-one inverters, when the when the battery's closed loop communication goes to the inverter or when it goes into the Victron system, that they're going to tell the charger to slow down the charge or increase the charge based on the battery's ability and charging profile. So if the batteries report, hey, I'm charged, the Victron system may say, hey, just float it at 54 volts as opposed to charge it at 56 volts. So absolutely the answer to that is yes, most likely. But again, there are no standards in place. So that doesn't necessarily mean universally that's the answer. Mike from Arizona asked, what exactly is the difference between open loop and closed loop batteries? The difference is an open loop battery, meaning that if it supports no communication, it's just a dumb battery like most of your car batteries. You want to charge it, you put voltage on it. If it can take the charge, it takes it. If it can't, it doesn't. When it gets full, it stops taking voltage. If you put too much voltage in it, then you can cause it problems. The BMS is designed to stop the over voltage and stuff like that, but the battery doesn't have any communication with the outside world to tell it what it's allowed to take. Closed loop is exactly the opposite. There's a communication hooked up with the BMS inside to say, hey, tell me your status so that I can send you what you need to charge properly. Sarah in Oregon wants to know, is closed loop communications required for safety or just convenience? Um, it's I'm not sure it's either. It's probably convenience. In a lot of the environments where you have hands-off installations by professionals for people, it is nice to know the inverter is just going to listen to the batteries. They can monitor the batteries from a remote location and determine if there's any problems. So is it for safety? I guess you could consider it that way. But like I said, open loop has been used for years. But when you are communicating with the batteries directly and something goes wrong, if the inverter shuts down and causes it to stop, in an open loop, you don't know why it lost connection or whatnot. So you may continue to provide power in a situation where the batteries can't take it and it's going somewhere else and doing something bad that you don't want it to do. So I would say yes, it's probably required. No, it's not required, but it's good for safety. And then at the same time, it's also very convenient if you have a monitored situation where you have a professionally installed as opposed to a DIY where you're kind of watching it on a day-to-day basis anyway. Tim from Florida asked, can I run battery bank without any closed loop communications? And the answer to that is yes, you can run a battery bank without any closed loop communications. And I think my questions have made a full circle and that I have answered them all because I remember this question from Tom in Florida already, which probably means a few of the ones prior to this I had also duplicated. So I apologize for that. I'm going to call it Tuesday's tips. Tuesday's tips are complete for the day. I have answered all the questions about open loop and closed loop. I have told you about the new video this morning that released on a DIY battery, the new lead time battery for the solar coffee trailer that's coming out. It's a 24 volt, 100 amp open looped battery that I'm going to connect. And then I have the closed loop EG4 life power battery video coming out also in the future. I hope to see you in all of those. And I hope that if you enjoy this kind of content that you'll give this a like or subscribe if you don't want to miss anything else. And if you do the subscription, make sure you hit that bell so that you get notified when the new stuff comes out, not just showing up on your feed. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you the next time, and thank you for everything.